Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today's chapter is on user stories. We learned about DFDs and UML use case diagrams. Contrary to them, user stories are textual almost always. Let's see examples of user stories first. As a power user, I can specify files or folders to backup so that backup can be based on file size, date created, and date modified. Another example, as a user, I can indicate folders not to backup so that my backup drive isn't filled up with things that I don't need to be saved. As the screen shows, a user story is meant to be just a note, not a big description about what the user does and or expects. That necessarily means an user story isn't supposed to have all the details. Important to note that a user story is written from the user's point of view, not the software engineer's point of view. The reason for that is a user story lays down the user's expectation. Why? Because it is that expectation that needs to be fulfilled by the engineering team. In this case, of course, the term user is used in a broad perspective. We may very well assume that a user's expectation is the expectation from the business. The question is, why not a detailed one? Because if it is a detailed one, the tendency is to assume that all details have been provided and therefore no one is willing to have further communication. And that is a major risk because the customer may think, what? I've already given all the details, even though he may have missed something. The software engineer, without knowing the missing part, will develop, which of course lacks the missed out functionality. And it is also not about missing piece of information only. When you see a long descriptive paragraph, you would naturally assume that all details are there. Then you sit down and interpret the paragraph your way, and you may end up understanding it differently than what was in the mind of the user. With a small note in the form of a user story, it will necessitate a discussion. Any product comprises of many user stories and hence many discussions. This is much more foolproof because now there is no missed out expectation. What goes in such discussions? Who says what? The business stakeholders, sponsors, product owners specifies only the in order to, so that, and as a parts of a user story. The delivery team proposes several options for I want. And then both sides together evaluate the options and the business stakeholders decide which one will be implemented. Are you working in a team following agile methodology? If yes, you may already be using user stories. The concept of user story goes hand in hand with agile principles like changing requirements, frequent delivery, individuals and interactions, etc. Going back to our examples, have you noticed the construct of the sentence as a I can so that? Another common format is in order to as a I can. A lot of people think that this is the right way of depicting a user story. And if you're not doing it, you're wrong. Wrong. There is absolutely no prescribed format. You use whatever suits to the team. Just ensure that it is stated from the end user's point of view or the user's point of view, business point of view. Despite however simple it sounds, creating right stories, working with and delivering them as planned seems to be always the biggest problem for most teams. It requires a lot of practice, a lot of maturity, and a lot of collaboration. Let's go through some tips and tricks and myths perhaps too that have been time tested and perhaps things will start becoming clearer. Stories are for telling, not writing. User stories are often misunderstood as lightweight requirements given by the business stakeholders to the team. If a team passively receives documents in a handover, regardless of what they are called, and whether they're on paper or in a wiki or in a ticketing system, that's not really working with user stories. User stories imply a completely different model, requirements by collaboration. Handovers are replaced by frequent involvement and discussions. When domain and technical knowledge is spread among different people, a discussion between business stakeholders and delivery teams often leads to good questions, options, and product ideas. Therefore, an user story is just a note, a trigger for such discussions where one or more people will tell the story and others listen to it, discuss it, question it, and at the end of the day, there is only one version of the story that is in everyone's head. Don't worry too much about story format. I mentioned this before. Don't sweat yourself over the format like, as a user, I want to blah blah blah, so that blah blah blah. A user story is just a pointer for further discussion, and that's it. So, instead of as a power user, I can specify files or folders to backup so that backup can be blah blah blah, which is a great structure for a discussion though. It is completely okay to write power users can specify files or folders or even shorter format. You may even write questions as stories. These questions are the questions that will be asked by the user to the software, and the software should be able to answer them. Hence, they too are user stories. Examples: what is the average time spent on sales? What are the other products that are similar to the one displayed? Which restaurant has the highest customer rating for sushi? The problem with templates is that sometimes templates forces you to maintain it just for the sake of it. As a trader, I want to trade because I want to trade. So the best way is to let it go free or use combinations of templates. Avoid generic user roles. When creating stories, try to build the story from the point of view of a specific user. Imagine this. As a user, I want to log in through social networks in order not to remember another username and password. Seems good, right? The story checklist originally involved Facebook, LinkedIn, Google Plus, OpenID, and all those would become individual stories later on. Because it was not clear who was that mythical user, the stakeholders clearly thought that the more networks the team could integrate, the better. And tomorrow they may come back and ask, why didn't you integrate Twitter? The dispute happens because we did not specify specific users for a specific social media platforms, but a overly generalized social media user. Evaluate zone of control and sphere of influence. Now, what are they? The zone of control includes all those things in a system that we can change on our own. We can control them. The sphere of influence includes activities that we can impact but can't exercise full control over. The external environment includes the elements over which we have no influence at all. These three system areas and the boundaries between them provide a very useful perspective on what a delivery team can hope to achieve with user stories. A good guideline is that the user need of a story, the so that part, should be ideally in the sphere of influence of the business team, and the actual deliverable, the I want part, should ideally be in the zone of control of the engineering team. This is not a 100% rule though, and there are valid exceptions, but if a story does not fit into this pattern, it should be investigated. When the user need of a story is in the zone of control of the delivery group, the story is effectively a task without risk, which should raise alarm bells. There are three common scenarios. The story might be a fake story, a micro story, or a misleading story. Fake stories are those about the needs of delivery team members. For example, as a QA, in order to test faster, I want the database server restarts to be automated. This is definitely not a user story. It doesn't help the business. It does not impact the business value. Micro stories are what you get when a large business story is broken down into very small pieces so that some small parts no longer carry any risk. They're effectively stepping stones to something larger. Such stories are okay, but it's important to track the whole hierarchy and measure the success of the micro stories based on the success of that larger piece. Misleading stories describe a solution and not the real user need. For example, as a back office operator, in order to run reports faster, I want the customer reporting database queries to be optimized. Once again, this is a solution. It's not a story. It's not adding to the business value. Use hierarchical backlogs. One of the deepest pitfalls of fake iterative delivery is a story card hell. Story card hell is when you have 300 story cards and you have to keep track of them all. When you have 300 cards, you lose the ability to understand what they mean. Story card hell is dangerous because it provides an illusion that the process is working iteratively, whereas in fact the teams are following a detailed plan set months ago. Three key problems with that. One, the delivery team wastes a horrible amount of time tracking and managing unnecessary items, time that could have been invested much more wisely. Two, when market opportunities change, the business stakeholders are faced with a serious dilemma. Aligning the plan to meet the changed circumstances would lead to throwing away a lot of work sunk into estimation and breaking commitments. On the other hand, keeping the plan would lead to delivering outdated or useless features or delaying work on something more important. Number three, it's very easy to hide scope creep and unnecessary work in a pile of several dozen items or hundreds of items. It becomes very difficult to challenge the value and goal of individual items in such a big pile, which means that it's much more likely that the team will waste time doing the wrong things. Smaller user stories, deliverable within an iteration, are great for providing low level process visibility. They're useless for a big picture view though. This lack of big picture visibility is a key reason why business stakeholders push for a detailed estimates and commitments on dozens of hundreds of stories upfront. A hierarchical backlog allows different stakeholders to discuss, report on, and analyze different levels of information. It allows the team to plan iterative delivery and divide work into small independent items. It allows the business stakeholders to plan and monitor large business impacts. Instead of micromanaged control, a hierarchical backlog provides visibility and transparency, removing the need to detail all levels of hierarchy at the start. We often use hierarchy at least at four levels. One, big picture business objective. For example, grow mobile subscriptions. Number two, smaller scale business change that might contribute to that big picture. For example, longer user engagement from mobile devices, better conversion from web to mobile, easier migration from competitor systems, etc. Number three, software deliverables that might support those changes. For example, data import from competitor formats, mobile data preview, etc. And number four, smaller deliverable slices that we could ship independently. For example, file access competitor systems, importing individual data formats, a mobile preview page, etc. Just remember this, we avoid breaking down large items into smaller ones until we need to populate the lower levels with more information. Set out global concerns at the start of a milestone. User stories generally bring small iterative enhancements, so they are not particularly well suited for addressing global cross-cutting concerns such as capacity, performance, security. For example, we can write a user story about improving performance, but performance metrics are probably impacted implicitly by loads of stories. The core of the problem is a misalignment of impact. Global concerns apply to almost all stories, but the related requirements change on a much slower timescale. A good strategy for dealing with such issues is to have a separate discussion about global concerns once per milestone. This leads to a framework which applies to all work during the phase of delivery so that the issues do not need to be individually considered for each story. So some examples of items that we can discuss: functionality, of course, usability, reliability, performance, supportability, operational requirements, licensing requirements, implementation constraints, resource limitations, and maybe a few more. Key decision makers can probably participate in a separate discussion on global concerns once per milestone, even if they are too busy to attend every single story discussion. This makes it easier to agree on global targets and make a list of important cross-cutting concerns. These targets then become design constraints that developers always have to consider. Investigate value on multiple levels. Most good stories are multi-layered. They influence one thing which leads to another, which improves some high-level aspect of someone's work. Such stories are very difficult to capture with just a single value statement, and forcing them into any kind of standard story format actually prevents fruitful discussion. See the following stories. In order to increase revenue, as a site operator, I want better browser compatibility for shared documents. This sounds too high level and disconnected from reality, in particular because users do not pay for sharing or viewing. In order to increase viral signups, as a site operator, I want better browser compatibility for shared documents. This sounds more down to earth but does not really capture the core reason behind the change. In order to increase user engagement as a site operator, I want better browser compatibility for shared documents. It describes the core reason behind the change, but it's not clear why the deliverable would lead to that value. In order to view documents in a mobile browsers more easily, as an anonymous recipient of a shared document, I want better sharing compatibility. This sounds as if the user group is completely irrelevant for the bigger picture. In order for recipients to view documents easier, as a document creator, I want better browser compatibility for shared documents. This sounds as if it is a nice feature to have, but not contributing to the bottom line. In cases like this, we have seen people spend half an hour arguing which of the values and users to put into their prescribed story format, only for the business users to get up and leave, insisting that they don't care about what's in the story, but it has to be done, and done yesterday. At that point, the story turns into an all or nothing task, and it becomes incredibly difficult to slice it, negotiate scope, or prioritize iterative deliveries. Now let's go through another example. As an unregistered user, I would like to sign up using Twitter so that I don't have to re-enter all of my info and remember a new password. In the discussion, investigating further levels of value, they discovered that this could bring the following benefits to the organization. 1. Decreased dropout during registration. 2. Having access to people's social network accounts for marketing purpose. 3. Opening a path for further social network integration features. In the original story description, potential business value was masked in trying to meet a perceived user need, and the story did not explain the big picture directly. Discussing the three higher level options further, now they decided to focus on a decreased dropout. This led to a hypothesis that giving users the option to register through Twitter would improve the conversion rates by 5%. Example. This led to a quick test, a link to register via Twitter, which just measured clicks and displayed a message that the feature would be available soon. After a couple of disappointing click results, they decided to drop the story and build something else instead. Don't push everything into a story. One last thing. There are plenty of things any software team needs to do which just don't fit into the user stories conceptually. Within 1 week, people in a team we recently worked with were involved in a setting up new development machines, rebuilding test servers, upgrading to new version of an infrastructure library, automating test log analysis, and speeding up deployments, so on and so forth. Such tasks are not stories. They help the delivery team work more efficiently or protect against future risks. All these tasks have an indirect value in that they help the team deliver software more sustainably in the future, but they don't carry any direct value to the end user or the stakeholders of the business. A dedicated time for internal tasks helps to avoid competing priorities. Stakeholders are always going to choose externally valuable items over internally valuable tasks until something internal becomes so urgent that it has to be done. Because of this, most internal work, fortunately or unfortunately, is done as an emergency firefighting, but they cannot be part of user stories. With a separate allowance for internal work, teams can complete internally valuable tasks at a sustainable pace. This also avoids the need to explain the internal work to people who don't care about it. So next, what we are coming up is a process flow with UML. And that's going to be our last chapter in the requirements series. Please do subscribe, like, share, and if you're benefiting from these sessions, thank you.